The deepest pain in your life wasn't an accident. It wasn't there to break you. It was there to wake you up. What if the person who hurt you most was actually your greatest teacher? Most people spend years trying to forget who wounded them. They replay the betrayal, the silence, the moment everything cracked, and assume it was meaningless suffering. But here's the uncomfortable truth Carl Jung revealed. Pain that cuts deep is never random. It appears exactly where growth was avoided, where consciousness needed to expand, where the shadow waited to be seen. This video isn't about excusing what happened. It's about understanding why it happened and how that pain, once decoded, can become clarity, strength, and direction. When you see the lesson hidden inside the wound, the story flips. The hurt loses control and meaning takes its place. Stay with me, because once you see this, you'll never look at your past or the people who hurt you the same way again. There's a reason the deepest pain never fades quietly. It lingers, taps on the shoulder, and refuses to be ignored. What hurt the most didn't come to ruin life, but to interrupt it. Pain works like a strict teacher, harsh voice, sharp lessons, no excuses. Carl Jung believed the psyche uses suffering to force growth and consciousness. That wound wasn't random. It marked the exact place where growth had stalled. Inside that pain lived the first signal of transformation and awakening. Most people try to escape pain, but pain keeps chasing awareness. It's like ignoring a flashing dashboard light while driving at full speed. Eventually, the engine stops, not to punish, but to protect. Emotional wounds behave the same way inside the shadow. They demand attention because something vital needs healing. Growth doesn't start with comfort. It starts with friction and betrayal, and that friction becomes the doorway to individuation. Think of pain as a cracked mirror rather than a broken one. It reflects parts of identity that were never questioned before. Often the person who hurt someone triggered old patterns and projection. That trigger wasn't weakness. It was unfinished inner work asking to be seen. Jung taught that what remains unconscious controls behavior silently. Once consciousness enters the wound, the story changes. Healing begins the moment meaning replaces confusion. In real life, this looks painfully ordinary. Someone gives too much, ignores red flags, accepts less than they deserve. Then betrayal arrives like a storm, shaking every belief about love and trust. But here's the twist. That storm exposes fragile foundations. Strong structures aren't destroyed by truth. Illusions are. Pain reveals where boundaries were missing and self-worth was outsourced. That realization becomes the seed of transformation. A wise response isn't revenge or denial, but observation. Writing down emotional triggers helps map hidden patterns. Reading works like Man and His Symbols deepens shadow awareness. Therapy, journaling, or honest solitude sharpen consciousness. Every wound carries a lesson wrapped in discomfort. Ignore it, and pain repeats. Face it, and healing accelerates. Because once pain teaches, it quietly prepares the next awakening. The deepest wounds rarely come from enemies. They come from people who were trusted with the keys to the inner world. Closeness lowers defenses, and that's where pain finds its way in. When someone intimate causes hurt, it shakes identity, not just emotions. Carl Jung understood this well. Intimacy exposes the shadow faster than distance. The closer the bond, the deeper the cut. Not because of cruelty, but access. And access always carries the risk of transformation. Strangers can disappoint, but they can't dismantle beliefs. Only those inside emotional walls can do that kind of damage. That's why betrayal from loved ones feels existential. It doesn't just hurt. It rewrites trust, memory, and meaning. Pain here isn't about the event alone, but about broken expectations. Growth begins when expectations are examined instead of defended. That examination opens a door to consciousness. Think of emotional closeness like removing armor. It allows warmth, connection, and intimacy, but also vulnerability. When harm occurs, it feels like being struck without protection. Yet Jung would say that armor prevents individuation. Without vulnerability, the shadow remains hidden and untouched. Pain enters where authenticity lives, and authenticity is always the birthplace of awakening. In everyday life, this shows up in family, friendships, and love. A parent dismisses feelings, a partner betrays trust, a friend disappears. The pain feels personal because it is personal. But here's the hidden layer. Those moments reveal emotional dependencies. They expose where validation replaced self-worth. Healing starts by reclaiming authority over inner stability. That shift transforms pain into growth. A practical step is observing emotional reactions without judgment. Notice which words, silences, or behaviors trigger strong responses. Those triggers act like maps pointing toward the shadow. Reading The Undiscovered Self helps clarify these dynamics. Boundaries, reflection, and conscious distance restore balance. Pain loses power when patterns become visible, and once visibility emerges, the next lesson quietly forms. Pain has a reputation for cruelty, but it's rarely senseless. It arrives like an uninvited guest carrying an urgent letter. Most people tear the envelope apart without reading the message. Carl Jung saw suffering as communication from the unconscious. It speaks when intuition is ignored and truth is avoided. Pain doesn't shout to hurt. It raises its voice to be heard. And once it's heard, its tone begins to change. When pain is treated as punishment, shame takes control. Shame whispers that something is broken beyond repair. But pain doesn't seek to condemn. It seeks to redirect. It works like a detour sign on a collapsing bridge. Ignore it, and the fall becomes inevitable. Listen, and a safer path slowly reveals itself. That shift is the beginning of healing. Imagine touching a hot stove as a child. The burn hurts, but the lesson protects for life. Emotional pain functions the same way. It imprints awareness deeper than logic ever could. Jung believed the psyche learns through experience, not explanation. Pain leaves a mark, so consciousness won't forget. That mark becomes wisdom when interpreted correctly. In daily life, this might look like repeated disappointments, the same relationship patterns, the same emotional outcomes. Pain repeats because the message wasn't integrated. Journaling patterns and emotional cycles exposes the lesson. Asking, "What is this trying to teach?" reframes the experience. That question alone reduces suffering's intensity, meaning dissolves chaos into structure. Practical growth begins with slowing down reactions. Instead of numbing pain, sit with it briefly. Name the emotion, locate it in the body, breathe through it. Books like Man's Search for Meaning deepen this approach. Pain loses its grip when curiosity replaces resistance. Once the message is received, punishment disappears, and understanding prepares the mind for the next awakening. Most people believe pain comes only from what others do, but Jung would quietly challenge that assumption. He taught that what wounds us often activates something unresolved within. The shadow isn't evil. It's everything ignored, denied, or postponed. When someone hurts deeply, they often touch that hidden territory, not because they planned to, but because the psyche arranged the meeting. Pain becomes the introduction to a part of the self long avoided. Think of the shadow, like a locked room inside the house of identity. It stays closed, not because it's dangerous, but because it's unfamiliar. When another person enters life and causes emotional turbulence, they don't create the room, they open the door. Suddenly, anger, fear, jealousy, or dependency rush out. Jung called this projection, seeing outside what lives inside. And projection is how the unconscious asks for attention. This is why certain people provoke disproportionate reactions. The response feels bigger than the situation itself. That's the shadow knocking, not the person attacking. For example, intense jealousy may hide unclaimed self-worth. Abandonment pain may reveal fear of standing alone. The shadow doesn't speak in words, it speaks in emotion. Awareness turns those emotions into guidance. In real life, this work begins with radical honesty. Instead of asking, "Why did they do this to me?" a deeper question emerges. What part of me reacted so strongly? Writing uncensored thoughts exposes patterns beneath the surface. Therapy or shadow journaling helps integrate these fragments. Reading ion or memories, dreams, reflections sharpens insight. Integration transforms pain into personal authority. Meeting the shadow isn't comfortable, but it's liberating. What's integrated no longer controls behavior unconsciously. The person who caused pain unknowingly became a mirror. That mirror reflected strength still undeveloped. Once reclaimed, projection dissolves into clarity. Pain stops feeling personal and starts feeling purposeful, and that purpose naturally leads into the next awakening. Emotional triggers don't appear by accident. They show up fast, loud, and often at the worst possible moment. A word, a look, a silence, and suddenly the nervous system reacts. Most people blame the situation, but the reaction tells a deeper story. Carl Jung saw triggers as signals from the unconscious. They point directly to places where healing hasn't finished yet. Every trigger is a map, not a mistake. Think of a trigger like a bruise you didn't know you had. Life presses it lightly, and the pain feels shocking. The pressure wasn't the cause. The bruise already existed. Emotional pain works the same way inside the shadow. What hurts disproportionately carries unfinished inner work. Growth begins when reaction turns into observation. That shift transforms chaos into clarity. In everyday life, this shows up constantly. Someone criticizes lightly and rage erupts. A delayed reply sparks anxiety or abandonment fear. These moments aren't about weakness, they're about awareness. Jung believed consciousness expands through emotional friction. Instead of suppressing the trigger, trace it backward. Ask what belief or wound it touched. A practical exercise is simple but powerful. When triggered, pause and label the emotion precisely. Is it anger, shame, fear, or grief? Then ask when this feeling first appeared in life. Journaling answers without editing reveals patterns quickly. Books like The Drama of the Gifted Child deepen this insight. Triggers lose power when named clearly. What once felt like sabotage becomes navigation. Triggers stop controlling behavior and start offering direction. They show where boundaries are weak or needs are unmet. Each emotional reaction becomes a teacher. Awareness replaces impulse, and healing accelerates. The map becomes clearer with every encounter, and following that map leads directly to the next lesson. Betrayal hits differently because it collapses reality in an instant. One moment, the world feels stable. The next, the flaw disappears. What hurts most isn't the act itself, but the illusion that just shattered. Carl Jung understood betrayal as a violent interruption of unconscious trust. It forces consciousness to wake up when comfort kept it asleep. Betrayal doesn't knock, it breaks the door. And through that broken door, awareness enters. Think of betrayal like a sudden blackout in a familiar house. You realize how much you relied on light you never questioned. The shock comes from disorientation, not darkness itself. Betrayal exposes where trust was blind, automatic, or unexamined. It reveals emotional shortcuts taken for the sake of safety. Pain erupts because certainty just died, but certainty often dies so truth can breathe. In real life, betrayal wears many faces. A partner lies, a friend switches sides, a family member chooses convenience. The mind replays memories, searching for warning signs it missed. That loop isn't madness, it's the psyche recalibrating reality. Jung believed breakdowns often precede breakthroughs. The mind dismantles false narratives to rebuild something sturdier. That rebuilding is the start of individuation. A grounded response begins with resisting impulsive conclusions. Not every betrayal defines worth or predicts the future. Instead, observe what belief was exposed. Was trust given without boundaries? Was love confused with dependence? Writing these insights down turns chaos into structure. Reading the undiscovered self reframes this collapse as growth. Clarity softens the emotional impact. Betrayal, when integrated, sharpens intuition. It teaches discernment without turning the heart rigid. The goal isn't suspicion, but conscious trust. Pain stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like initiation. Something old ended so something wiser could emerge. That shift changes how connections are formed forever, and it prepares the ground for the next inner realization. There's a quiet moment when pain stops being tolerable. What once felt normal suddenly feels heavy, wrong, unbearable. That shift isn't weakness, it's evidence of growth. Carl Jung would say consciousness expanded beyond an old identity. The version of the self that endured that pain no longer exists. Growth always creates tension with the past, and that tension signals inner evolution. Think of it like wearing shoes you've outgrown. At one time, they fit perfectly and carried you far. Now they pinch, restrict, and slow every step. The shoes didn't change, you did. Emotional pain works the same way. What you once tolerated now violates self-respect. That discomfort is a message, not a problem. Many people misinterpret this phase as becoming too sensitive. In reality, awareness increased and tolerance decreased. The psyche raises standards as self-worth strengthens. Jung believed individuation requires shedding outdated roles built on silence, self-abandonment, or overgiving collapse. Pain surfaces to force separation from those identities. That separation is necessary for healing. In practical terms, this shows up in subtle decisions. You stop explaining yourself to people who won't listen. You feel exhausted after certain conversations and energized after others. These reactions are internal compasses recalibrating direction. Tracking energy instead of approval clarifies what no longer fits. Books like The Courage to be Disliked reinforce this shift. Awareness replaces obligation. Outgrowing pain doesn't mean erasing the past. It means refusing to live from it. The nervous system learns new limits, new boundaries, new rhythms. What once felt like loyalty now feels like self-betrayal. That realization can be lonely, but it's honest. Growth often isolates before it aligns, and that alignment opens the door to the next lesson. When the same pain repeats, it's not bad luck, it's unfinished learning. Life has a strange way of replaying scenes until awareness catches up. Different faces, same feeling, same ending. Carl Jung believed repetition is the psyche insisting on growth. What isn't understood returns with more intensity, not to punish, but to demand attention. Repetition is the unconscious saying, "Look closer." Think of repetition like skipping a chapter in a book. The story won't make sense, no matter how fast you read ahead. You can change locations, relationships, even identities, but the missing chapter keeps pulling you back. Pain loops because the lesson wasn't integrated. Avoidance delays understanding. Awareness dissolves the loop. That's how growth quietly rewrites destiny. In real life, this shows up clearly. The same type of partner, the same emotional dynamic, the same disappointment, or the same work scenario. Overgiving, under-recognized, burned out. These patterns aren't coincidences. They're messages. Jung taught that fate is often the unconscious made visible. Once the pattern is seen, choice re-enters the picture, and choice is freedom. A practical approach starts with pattern tracking. Write down recurring emotional outcomes, not just events. Ask what role is being played each time. Rescuer, victim, pleaser. Then question what belief keeps that role alive. Books like Games People Play sharpen this awareness. Patterns weaken when named clearly. Clarity breaks repetition's spell. When the lesson is finally learned, repetition stops quietly. There's no dramatic ending, just absence. What once felt inevitable simply no longer appears. Pain loses interest when awareness takes over. Life doesn't need to shout once it's understood. This is how growth feels from the inside, subtle, grounded, real. And that stillness prepares the way for a deeper integration. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as excusing what happened. That misunderstanding keeps many people trapped in resentment. Carl Jung saw forgiveness differently, as psychological integration. It's not about denying pain, but about refusing to carry it as identity. What remains unintegrated controls behavior silently. Forgiveness interrupts that control. It returns authority to the self. Think of forgiveness like setting down a heavy bag. The weight was real, but carrying it longer serves no purpose. Putting it down doesn't mean pretending it was light. It means choosing freedom over loyalty to suffering. Resentment keeps the wound active and present. Integration allows the wound to heal without erasure. That distinction changes everything. In daily life, forgiveness looks practical, not poetic. It shows up as emotional neutrality, not forced kindness. Memories lose their charge. Triggers lose their grip. Jung believed healing happens when opposites are held consciously. Pain and clarity coexist without conflict. The shadow is acknowledged, not suppressed. That balance restores inner peace. A grounded practice is writing unsent letters. Say everything that was never safe to say, then read it once and release it. This isn't about reconciliation, it's about closure. Books like Radical Acceptance support this process. The nervous system relaxes when expression is complete. Silence replaces inner noise. Forgiveness doesn't restore relationships, it restores energy. What once drained attention fades into perspective. The past loses its authority over present decisions. That freedom feels subtle but profound. Identity no longer orbits the wound. Integration completes the emotional cycle, and completion opens the space for true transformation. Pain reaches its final form when it becomes meaning. Before that, it feels chaotic, unfair, and endless. Carl Jung believed suffering transforms only when it's interpreted. Unexamined pain hardens the heart. Understood pain refines it. Meaning doesn't erase what happened. It reorganizes it. What once felt like damage becomes direction. That shift marks true psychological alchemy. Think of pain like raw metal pulled from the earth. Untouched, it's heavy and sharp, difficult to carry, but placed into fire, shaped with intention, it becomes a tool. Meaning is that fire. Without it, pain remains a burden. With it, pain becomes strength. Transformation always requires heat and time. In real life, meaning appears in subtle realizations. Someone recognizes they became stronger, clearer, less dependent. They notice boundaries forming naturally instead of forcefully. What once broke them now informs decisions. Jung saw this as the ego aligning with deeper consciousness. Pain stops defining identity and starts supporting wisdom. That's how inner authority is born. A practical way to extract meaning is reframing life events. Ask what qualities were forged through the experience. Resilience, discernment, courage, self-trust. Name them clearly. Writing a personal narrative shifts the emotional tone. Books like Man's Search for Meaning reinforce this process. Meaning anchors growth into daily behavior. Wisdom becomes usable, not abstract. When pain gains meaning, it loses control. It no longer dictates fear, reaction, or self-doubt. The story changes from "why did this happen" to "who did this shape me into?" That question transforms memory into momentum. Life moves forward with clarity instead of resistance. And that clarity prepares the ground for conscious closure. If this message resonated, it's because some part of you already recognized the truth. Pain doesn't disappear when time passes. It transforms when awareness arrives. What you've just absorbed isn't theory. It's an invitation to live differently, to notice your triggers instead of running from them, to observe your patterns instead of repeating them, to extract meaning where you once felt only loss. Now pause for a moment and ask yourself, what pain in your life keeps repeating? What relationship, memory, or betrayal still holds emotional charge? And more importantly, what lesson might you still be refusing to claim? Growth begins when you stop seeing yourself as someone who was hurt and start seeing yourself as someone who learned. That shift changes how you choose, how you love, how you set boundaries, and how you move forward. The wound doesn't disappear, but it no longer leads your life. You do. If this perspective challenged you, moved you, or gave you clarity, don't let it end here. Share your insight in the comments. What lesson did your deepest pain teach you? And if you want to keep exploring the mind, the shadow, and the quiet truths that transform lives, subscribe to Mind's Silent Echo and turn on notifications. There's much more waiting for you, and this is only the beginning.